In 2008, a helicopter landed on a cricket pitch in the middle of a packed stadium, and out stepped a man carrying a briefcase stuffed with $20 million in cash. The crowd went absolutely wild. Cameras flashed. Commentators lost their minds. And the man at the center of it all, a tall Texan in a white suit with silver hair and the confidence of someone who had never once doubted himself, smiled like he owned the world. Because as far as anyone could tell, he did. His name was Alan Stanford. And within 18 months, that same man would be in handcuffs, charged with running one of the most audacious financial frauds in American history. $7 billion stolen. Thousands of victims across dozens of countries. And a paper empire built on little more than lies, charm, and an almost supernatural ability to make people believe whatever he wanted them to believe. This is the story of how one man fooled entire nations for nearly 2 decades, and how the house of cards finally came crashing down. Alan Stanford grew up in Natio, Texas, a small town where he played high school football and dreamed of something much bigger than the life around him. He liked to tell people he was descended from Leland Stanford, the railroad tycoon who founded Stanford University. That claim, like so many things Alan Stanford would say over the years, turned out to be somewhere between wildly exaggerated and completely fabricated. In the 1980s, Stanford was running a gym business in Texas that went bankrupt. Most people would have taken that as a sign to slow down, to recalibrate, to think carefully about their next move. Alan Stanford was not most people. He moved to Florida, watched his father run an insurance business, and then had what he considered his great idea. He would go to the Caribbean, to a tiny island nation called Antigua, and he would build a bank. Antigua was, at the time, a place with very loose financial regulations, a government that was quite open to outside investment, and a desperately small economy that needed money flowing into it. Stanford showed up there in 1986 and opened the Bank of Antigua, later rebranded as Stanford International Bank. He told people it was an offshore bank offering certificates of deposit with unusually high returns. Much higher than anything you could get in the United States or Europe. Suspiciously higher, some might say. But Stanford had answers for the skeptics. He had a proprietary investment strategy, he said. His team of analysts had developed a unique approach to managing money that allowed them to consistently outperform the market. Details were hard to come by, of course. Trade secrets, you understand. What he actually had was a Ponzi scheme. Money from new investors was being used to pay the returns promised to earlier investors. There were no magical investment strategies. There was no genius team of analysts. There was just a river of other people's money flowing into the bank and a smaller river flowing back out as promised returns, with Stanford himself scooping generously from the middle. But the scheme needed credibility to survive. And this is where Alan Stanford proved himself to be something rare, a fraudster with genuine gifts as a showman and a political operator. He cultivated relationships with the Antiguan government so thoroughly that the boundaries between his bank and the island nation became almost impossible to see from the outside. He donated money to local causes. He funded infrastructure projects. He employed hundreds of Antiguans. He was given Antiguan citizenship and eventually knighthood. The government of Antigua essentially became his partner, and the regulators who were supposed to oversee his bank were, to put it delicately, not asking too many questions. Stanford International Bank grew. He opened offices across Latin America, targeting wealthy investors in Mexico, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and beyond. His salespeople were trained to promise returns that conventional banks simply could not match. When potential investors asked how this was possible, they were given glossy brochures and introduced to the warm, commanding presence of Stanford himself, who could walk into a room and make every single person in it feel like they were being let in on something extraordinary. He moved to Houston, Texas, and built a financial services empire there as well. His company, Stanford Financial Group, employed thousands of people across the Americas. Many of them had no idea what was actually happening at the top. They were just financial advisors, secretaries, compliance officers, living people who believed in good faith that they worked for a legitimate enterprise. Stanford lived with breathtaking extravagance. He had a fleet of private jets. He had yachts. He had homes across multiple continents. He threw parties that left guests genuinely awed. He dated multiple women simultaneously and did not particularly try to hide it. He was loud and large and impossible to ignore, and in the world of finance, that kind of visible prosperity is often mistaken for proof of competence. And then came cricket. In 2008, Stanford announced that he was going to transform cricket with a tournament unlike anything the sport had ever seen. He called it the Stanford Super Series. He negotiated directly with the England and Wales Cricket Board to bring the England national team to Antigua to play a single 2020 match against a West Indies all-star team. The prize money, to be split among the winning team's players, was $20 million. For cricketers, who are not typically paid at the level of American professional athletes, this was staggering. Career-changing. Life-altering. The helicopter landing, the briefcase of cash, the celebrity presence, the spectacle of it all, this was Stanford at the absolute peak of his performance. He sat in the dugout during the match. He was photographed with the wives and girlfriends of England players on his lap, which caused a minor scandal on its own. He was everywhere. Untouchable. A man who had so thoroughly convinced the world of his legitimacy that a sovereign cricket board had handed him the keys to their most prestigious product. The West Indies team won the match. Stanford distributed the prize money. Everyone celebrated. And a few months later, the whole thing fell apart. The beginning of the end came in early 2009. The Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States had been receiving complaints about Stanford International Bank for years. There had been tips, whispers, and concerns dating back to the 1990s. But remarkably, the SEC had failed to act, a failure the agency would later be severely criticized for. When the SEC finally moved in February of 2009, they moved fast. Agents raided Stanford Financial Group's Houston offices. They froze assets. They issued a civil complaint alleging massive, ongoing fraud. Stanford, who had been in Antigua, fled. He was not immediately found. For several days, one of the most wanted men in America was simply gone, and the rumors swirled about where he might be, whether he would run, whether he had accounts hidden so deep that even regulators could not find them. He was found in Virginia, at his girlfriend's house. He surrendered without incident. He was, by all accounts, composed. He maintained his innocence. He had always been a man who could look you in the eye and say something completely false with total conviction, and he did exactly that, telling anyone who would listen that his bank was real, that the investments were real, that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. It was not a misunderstanding. Investigators discovered that Stanford International Bank's investment portfolio, supposedly worth billions of dollars, was almost entirely fictional. The bank had claimed to hold a carefully diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, and real estate. The reality was that most of the money had been loaned directly to Stanford himself, money he used to fund his jets and yachts and houses and parties and lifestyle. Whatever legitimate investments existed were massively insufficient to cover the liabilities owed to depositors. Approximately 30,000 investors across 113 countries had put money into the bank. Many of them lost everything. Retirees who had invested their life savings. Small business owners who had trusted their advisors. Families who had been sold the dream of safe, high returns in a reliable offshore institution. All of them now faced the reality that the institution had been a fiction. The legal proceedings took years. Stanford hired and fired lawyers repeatedly. He claimed to have suffered amnesia following a prison fight. He claimed the prosecution was politically motivated. He claimed, at various points, almost every possible defense except the one thing that would have saved time for everyone, which was the truth. In 2012, Alan Stanford was convicted on 13 of 14 federal charges including wire fraud, mail fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 110 years in federal prison, effectively a life sentence. He would have been around 60 years old when he walked out of that courtroom in chains, and he will almost certainly die in prison. The aftermath touched everyone. The England Cricket Board faced serious questions about due diligence. The government of Antigua faced an economic and reputational catastrophe. The SEC faced pointed congressional inquiries about why they had taken so long to act despite years of warnings. And thousands of ordinary people who had simply wanted a decent return on their savings were left trying to piece their financial lives back together. There is something almost theatrical about the Alan Stanford story, and that theatricality is exactly the point. The helicopter, the briefcase, the white suit, the knighthood. These were not incidental details. They were the product. The spectacle was the fraud. Stanford understood before almost anyone else in his world that if you looked wealthy enough, connected enough, confident enough, a frightening number of people would simply stop asking questions. The performance of success was its own form of evidence. The people who did ask questions, who noticed that the returns were too high, who wondered why a Caribbean bank with a largely unknown investment strategy could consistently outperform global markets, those people were usually shown the door or reassured by a salesperson trained to handle doubts. The machine was built to absorb skepticism and transform it into compliance. This is, unfortunately, not a story with a tidy lesson. The fraud worked for almost 20 years. It collapsed not because of brilliant detection but because the 2008 financial crisis made it impossible to keep the money moving at the rate required to sustain the illusion. Ponzi schemes are always vulnerable in economic downturns, when investors need their money back and there simply is not enough new money coming in to cover the withdrawals. Without the crisis, Stanford might have kept going for another decade. The victims are still waiting for meaningful restitution. The receiver appointed to recover assets has clawed back some funds over the years, but the amounts recovered represent a fraction of what was lost. For most of the 30,000 investors, the money is simply gone. Alan Stanford sits in a federal prison in Florida. He is in his early 70s now. He will almost certainly never be free again. And somewhere in the Caribbean, on the island of Antigua where he once built a kingdom, the buildings he funded still stand, the cricket ground still bears traces of his influence, and people who remember him describe a man who seemed, for a very long time, like exactly what he said he was. That is perhaps the most unsettling part of all. If you want the full story and more dark business secrets, find us on YouTube at Corporate Crypt. The link is in the description. Subscribe so you never miss a story.